My daughter didn't come to my 70th birthday because she had more important things to do, I replied. Then support yourselves from now on. The next day, I sold the house without telling anyone. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I spent 3 weeks planning my 70th birthday party. 3 weeks choosing the perfect tablecloth, the china pattern that matched the autumn leaves outside, even practicing how to arrange the centerpieces so everyone would have a clear view across the table. I wanted everything to be perfect because this wasn't just any birthday. 7 decades on this earth felt significant, worth celebrating properly. The dining room looked beautiful that Saturday afternoon. 12 place settings, each one carefully positioned. I had made Emilia's favorite lemon cake from scratch, the same recipe I'd used for every birthday since she was 5. The house smelled like vanilla and fresh flowers. I kept glancing at the clock, checking my reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing down my dress. At 4:30, exactly 1 hour before the party was supposed to start, my phone rang. Mom! Emilia's voice sounded rushed, distracted. I could hear traffic in the background. Hi sweetheart, are you on your way? The cake turned out perfectly and I dash. That's actually why I'm calling. She cut me off. I can't make it today. The words hit me like cold water. I sat down heavily in the chair by the phone, staring at the empty place setting I had arranged just for her. The good silverware I polished yesterday morning. The cloth napkin folded into a perfect triangle. What do you mean you can't make it? Marcus got tickets to this networking event downtown. It's a huge opportunity for his business. These are people we've been trying to connect with for months. I felt something twist in my chest, that familiar ache I'd learned to push down over the years. But Emilia, it's my birthday party. We planned this weeks ago. I know, and I feel terrible about it. But this is really important, Mom. These connections could change everything for us. Important. The word echoed in my mind as I looked around the dining room I'd spent hours preparing. Was I not important? Was celebrating 7 decades of my life not worth a few hours of her time? What about the kids? I bought special games for them and dash. They're with Marcus's sister anyway. She's taking them to some indoor play place. Of course they were. My grandchildren, who I barely saw anymore unless Emilia needed a babysitter, were at a play place instead of celebrating with their grandmother. Mom? Are you there? I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound normal. Yes, I'm here. You understand, right? I mean, you know how hard Marcus has been working to grow the business. This could be the break we've been waiting for. I understood perfectly. I understood that my daughter had just told me that strangers at a networking event were more important than her mother's 70th birthday. I understood that I had spent 3 weeks planning a celebration for someone who couldn't be bothered to show up. Of course, I heard myself say, I understand. You're the best, Mom. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Maybe we can do lunch next week. Maybe. Such a small word that meant absolutely nothing. After I hung up, I stood in my dining room for a long time, looking at that empty chair. The guests would arrive soon. My neighbor Helen, the Mitchells from down the street, my book club friends. They would all ask where Emilia was, and I would have to explain why my only daughter couldn't be bothered to attend her mother's 70th birthday party. The doorbell rang at exactly 5:30. Helen stood on my porch with a beautifully wrapped gift and a warm smile. Where's our birthday girl? She asked, looking past me into the house. Oh, you know how it is, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Emilia came down with something at the last minute. Nothing serious, just didn't want to spread it around. The lie came so easily it scared me. As more guests arrived, I repeated the same story. Poor Emilia was under the weather. Such a shame she couldn't make it. Everyone was so understanding, so sympathetic. They didn't know I was protecting her reputation while she was out networking with people more important than her own mother. We had a lovely party. The cake was delicious, the conversation was warm, and everyone made such a fuss over me reaching this milestone. But all evening, my eyes kept drifting to that empty chair at the head of the table, the place setting that remained untouched. When the last guest left at 9:30, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the leftover cake and wondering when exactly I had become so dispensable in my daughter's life. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and all I could think about was how many times I'd made excuses for Emilia, how many times I'd covered for her absence, protected her image, smiled and lied to make her look better than she was. The memories came flooding back like a dam had burst in my mind. Emilia's college graduation. I'd worked double shifts at the diner for 2 years to help pay her tuition, my hands raw from washing dishes, my feet aching from standing for 12 hours straight. The morning of her graduation, she called to tell me she could only get one extra ticket, and Marcus's parents were flying in from California. You understand, don't you, Mom? His parents hardly ever get to see him, and they paid for his senior year. I understood. I sat at home that day, looking at the dress I'd bought specifically for her graduation, while strangers watched my daughter walk across that stage. Then there was her wedding. I'd saved for 3 years to pay for the reception she wanted. Sold my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I owned, to help cover the costs. During the planning, every suggestion I made was dismissed. That's not really our style, Mom. We were thinking something more elegant. Maybe you don't understand what we're going for. I became the checkbook for a wedding where I felt like an unwelcome guest. When the photos came back, I was in exactly 3 pictures, standing awkwardly at the edge of family groups that somehow never quite included me. The grandchildren's births were the worst. Both times, I waited for hours at the hospital while Marcus's family got the first visits, the first holds, the first photos. I was the grandmother who got the leftover time, the inconvenient visiting hours, the rushed hellos before more important people arrived. Marcus's mom is staying for 2 weeks to help out, Emilia had said after Tommy was born. Maybe you could come by after she leaves? I don't want too many people here at once. Too many people. As if her own mother was just another visitor, another obligation to manage. I remembered all the soccer games I missed because the parking is really limited, Mom, and Marcus's parents are already coming. All the school plays where I sat alone while Marcus's extended family filled an entire row. All the birthday parties where I was invited as an afterthought, arriving to find the cake already cut and the presents already opened. Every holiday became a negotiation. Christmas morning was always at Marcus's parents' house because they have more space, and it's tradition for his family. I got Christmas afternoon, after everyone was tired and the children were cranky from too much sugar. We'll come by around 4, Emilia would say, after the kids have had their naps. I learned to have Christmas dinner ready at 4 o'clock, learned to smile when they arrived exhausted and barely stayed an hour, learned to wrap presents they would open half-heartedly before asking if they could go home to play with their real presents. When I turned 65, I'd hinted for weeks about wanting to do something special. Maybe a small family dinner, just the 5 of us. Emilia nodded and said it sounded lovely, then called the day before to say they'd forgotten about Marcus's company picnic. It's mandatory for partners, Mom. You know how these corporate things are. I knew that my 65th birthday was less important than a company picnic with people who wouldn't remember my daughter's name in 6 months. For my 68th birthday, they took me to dinner at a chain restaurant near their house. Emilia spent the entire meal on her phone, fielding calls about some crisis at work. Marcus talked to the kids about their soccer schedules. I sat there eating mediocre pasta, watching my family exist around me but not with me. Lying in bed after my 70th birthday party, I realized something that made my chest feel hollow. I had spent decades making myself smaller, asking for less, accepting crumbs of attention and being grateful for them. I had trained my own daughter to treat me as an afterthought. Every time I swallowed my disappointment, every time I made excuses for her, every time I pretended her neglect didn't hurt, I had taught her that my feelings didn't matter, that my time had no value, that I would always be there, waiting patiently for whatever scraps of attention she could spare. The worst part wasn't even the missed events. It was the pattern. The casual way she dismissed me, the assumption that I would always understand, always forgive, always be available when convenient and invisible when not. As dawn broke outside my bedroom window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, clean anger at myself for allowing this to happen, and at Emilia for taking advantage of a mother's unconditional love. I woke up Sunday morning with an unusual sense of clarity. The anger from the night before had settled into something colder, more focused. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and looked around the house I'd lived in for 42 years. The house where I'd raised Emilia as a single mother after her father died. The house I'd mortgaged and remortgaged to pay for her college, her wedding, Her down payment on that fancy house across town. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about what Emilia needed or wanted. I was thinking about what I needed. I needed to stop being a convenient mother. I needed to stop being taken for granted. I needed to stop waiting for my daughter to remember I existed. By 9 o'clock, I was dressed and in my car, driving to Richardson Realty downtown. I'd driven past their office 1,000 times but never really noticed it. Today, the red brick building with its cheerful yellow sign looked like exactly what it was. A doorway to a different life. Mrs. Patterson? The young realtor, Jennifer, looked surprised to see me on a Sunday morning. I wasn't expecting you until our appointment next week. I'd called Friday afternoon about possibly downsizing, thinking maybe a smaller place would be easier to maintain. But that was before my birthday party. Before I'd spent an entire night realizing how much of my life I'd wasted waiting for crumbs of affection. I've changed my mind about the timeline, I said, sitting down in the chair across from her desk. I want to put my house on the market immediately. Jennifer blinked. Immediately? As in this week? As in today if possible? She opened a file folder, clearly flustered. Well, we'd need to do a walkthrough, determine a fair market value, discuss staging options. The holidays are coming up, so the market typically slows down in the winter months. Maybe we should wait until spring when No. The word came out sharper than I intended. I'm not waiting until spring. I'm not waiting for a better market. I'm 70 years old, Jennifer. How much time do you think I have to wait for the perfect moment? Something in my voice must have convinced her because she closed the folder and picked up a legal pad. Okay, Mrs. Patterson. Let's talk about what you're looking for. What was I looking for? I'd been so focused on what I was leaving behind that I hadn't really thought about what came next. Something smaller, I said slowly. A place where I don't rattle around like a marble in a jar. Maybe downtown, walking distance to shops and restaurants. Somewhere I can have a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for my daughter to call. The last part slipped out before I could stop it. Jennifer's expression softened. Divorce? She asked gently. Worse, I said. 50 years of motherhood. We spent the next 2 hours going through listings. Jennifer showed me condos and apartments, small houses with manageable yards, senior living communities with social activities and meal plans. For the first time in years, I felt excited about something. Not anxious, not guilty, not worried about how it would affect someone else. Just excited. This one, I said, pointing to a bright apartment in a converted Victorian downtown. I want to see this one. It was perfect. 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for sewing and crafts. A kitchen with modern appliances and enough counter space for one person. A living room with huge windows that faced a small park where I could watch people walk their dogs and children play on swings. The building has a community room, Jennifer explained as we toured the space. They have book clubs, game nights, potluck dinners. Very active social scene. A social scene. When was the last time I'd had friends who weren't connected to Emilia somehow? When was the last time I'd gone somewhere just because I wanted to, not because someone needed something from me? I'll take it, I said. Jennifer stared at me. Don't you want to think about it? Discuss it with your family. Family. The word felt heavy in my mouth. My family will be fine, I said. They've made it very clear they don't need me. By Tuesday, Jennifer had listed my house. By Thursday, we had 3 showings scheduled. By Saturday, exactly 1 week after my disastrous birthday party, I had 2 offers. I accepted the higher one without I didn't call Emilia to tell her. I didn't ask her opinion or seek her approval. For once in my adult life, I made a decision that was entirely mine, and it felt like taking my first real breath in decades. The house sold in 2 weeks. The apartment would be ready the 1st of December. I had exactly 3 weeks to pack up 42 years of memories and decide what belonged in my new life. Most of it, I realized, belonged in the past. The dining room set where I'd hosted so many holidays while Emilia checked her phone. The guest bedroom furniture that sat empty because my daughter preferred hotels when she visited. The china cabinet full of dishes I'd saved for special occasions that somehow never came. I called the Salvation Army to schedule a pickup. I called an estate sale company to handle the furniture. I kept what mattered. My sewing machine, my books, my grandmother's quilt, and the photo albums from when Emilia was little and still thought I was the most important person in her world. Everything else could go to people who would actually appreciate it. For 3 weeks I sorted and packed and donated, and with each box that left the house I felt lighter. I was shedding not just possessions but obligations, expectations, the weight of being perpetually disappointed. My new life was waiting for me in a sunny apartment downtown, and for the first time in decades, I couldn't wait to begin it. The phone started ringing at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before I was supposed to move. I was in the kitchen packing my everyday dishes into newspaper when the shrill sound cut through the quiet house. I knew who it was before I looked at the caller ID. Emilia. I let it ring. Then I went back to wrapping my coffee mugs in newspaper, each one carefully cushioned against breakage. The ringing stopped, then started again immediately. Then again. And again. By the time I'd finished with the mugs, she'd called 17 times. I finally answered on the 18th call, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because the ringing was giving me a headache. What? Not a question. A statement. Mom, what the hell is going on? Emilia's voice was shrill, panicked. Mrs. Henderson just called and said there's a sold sign in your front yard. She said movers are coming Thursday. Mrs. Henderson. The neighborhood always been a little too interested in everyone else's business. I should have known word would get back to Emilia eventually. Yes, I said simply. There is. Yes? That's all you have to say? Mom, you can't just sell the house without telling me. I wasn't aware I needed your permission. There was a pause, as if she couldn't quite process what I'd said. Permission? This isn't about permission, it's about common sense. You can't make a decision this big without talking to family first. Family. There was that word again. Family discusses things, Emilia. Family shows up for each other. Family doesn't cancel on their mother's 70th birthday for a networking event. Oh my God, you're doing this because of the party? Mom, I explained about that. It was important for Marcus's business. More important than me. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. You said you had something more important to do. I could hear her breathing heavily through the phone, trying to control her temper. Fine. You're right. I should have been there. But selling the house? Mom, this is completely insane. You're not thinking clearly. Not thinking clearly. The same thing she'd said when I'd suggested they visit more often. The same thing she'd said when I'd asked why I was never invited to Tommy's soccer games anymore. Apparently, any time I had an opinion that inconvenienced her, I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I said. Where are you even going to live? Please tell me you haven't fallen for some retirement home scam. I bought an apartment downtown. It's lovely. 2 bedrooms, walking distance to everything I need. Downtown? Mom, you don't know anything about city living. What about parking? What about crime? What about Dash? What about you start worrying about your own problems instead of mine? The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. For once I'd said exactly what I was thinking. Silence stretched between us. Then Emilia's voice came back. Quieter but with an edge of something I'd never heard before. Fear. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. This isn't like you. No, it's not. The old me would have asked your opinion. The old me would have worried about inconveniencing you. The old me would have stayed in this house forever, waiting for you to remember I exist. I don't forget you exist. Really? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed something, not because it was a holiday, just because you wanted to talk to your mother. Another silence. I called last month to ask if I could babysit Tommy while you went to that conference in Dallas. That's not the only reason I called. Yes, Emilia, it was. You asked how I was, I said fine, and then you spent 20 minutes explaining why you needed me to watch Tommy for 4 days. I heard her take a shaky breath. I've been busy, Mom. You know how crazy things have been with Marcus's business and the kids' schedules. I know you've been busy. You've been busy for 30 years. Too busy for my birthday parties, too busy for my holidays, too busy for my company unless you need something from me. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tell me, Emilia, what do you know about my life? Do you know I've been taking watercolor classes at the community center? Do you know I've been thinking about getting a dog? Do you know I haven't had a real vacation in 15 years because every time I save money for a trip, someone in this family needs something? Silence again. Pressed on. Do you know I've been lonely? Do you know I spend most weekends by myself hoping you might call or stop by? Do you know what it feels like to be your mother, only when it's convenient for you? Mom. Her voice was smaller now, uncertain. I'm 70 years old, Emilia. I raised you by myself after your father died. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I gave you everything I had, and somehow that turned me into someone you take for granted. I don't take you for granted. You missed my 70th birthday for a networking event. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I told you I was sorry about that. No, you told me you felt terrible. You never actually said you were sorry. And you know what? It doesn't matter anymore. I'm done waiting for you to remember that I matter. Of course you matter. You're my mother. Then start acting like it. Because I'm done being your mother on layaway, stored up in this house waiting for you to have time for me. I hung up before she could respond. The phone immediately started ringing again. But this time I unplugged it from the wall. For the first time in 30 years, I had officially ended a conversation with my daughter on my terms. Moving day arrived on a crisp December morning. I stood in my empty house, looking at the bare walls where family photos used to hang, listening to the echo of my footsteps on hardwood floors that had once been covered with rugs and furniture, and the accumulation of 4 decades. I felt nothing but relief. The movers had loaded the last box into their truck when Emilia's car pulled into the driveway. She got out slowly, her face pale, her designer coat wrapped tightly around her despite the mild weather. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. Mom. Her voice was careful, controlled. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. You can't do this. You can't just throw away 40 years of history. I turned to face her fully for the first time in weeks. I'm not throwing anything away, Emilia. I'm finally taking something for myself. She looked past me into the empty house, and I saw her swallow hard. This is where I grew up. This is where Dad's memories are. Your father's memories are in here, I said, touching my chest. They don't live in these walls. And this house stopped being a home the day I realized I was living in it alone. You weren't alone. I visited. You dropped by when you needed something. There's a difference. Emilia's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered my 70th birthday party, the empty chair, the lie I'd told my friends about why she wasn't there. I brought the kids, she said, gesturing toward the car where I could see Tommy and Sarah in the back seat. They want to see Grandma before you move. It was a manipulation and we both knew it. But I walked to the car anyway because I did love my grandchildren, even if their mother used them as emotional weapons. Grandma. Tommy, 8 years old and all elbows and enthusiasm, threw his arms around my waist. Mom says you're moving to a new house. I am, sweetheart. A nice apartment downtown with big windows. Can we visit you there? Sarah asked. She was 6, with Emilia's green eyes and her father's serious expression. Of course you can visit. I knelt down to their level, looking them both in the eye. But visits need to be planned ahead of time. And your mom needs to call first. I said the last part loud enough for Emilia to hear. When I stood up, she was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something between respect and fear. Mom, I know I haven't been the best daughter lately. Lately? I interrupted. Emilia, you haven't been present in my life for years. You call when you need money or babysitting or when someone dies and you need me to handle the arrangements. Otherwise, I'm just the woman who raised you, collecting dust in this house until you require my services. Her face crumpled. That's not true. When was the last time you asked me about my dreams? My goals? What I wanted to do with the rest of my life? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That's what I thought. I hugged the children goodbye, promised them I would call once I was settled, and got into my car. In the rearview mirror I watched Emilia standing in the driveway of the house where I'd raised her, looking lost and confused. Good. Maybe being lost would teach her to find her way back to being a daughter instead of just a taker. My new apartment was everything I'd hoped for. Bright, clean, manageable. The building had a community room where residents gathered for coffee every morning, a small library, and a bulletin board covered with activities and classes. Dorothy lived 2 doors down, a 73-year-old retired librarian with silver hair and a laugh that could fill a room. She knocked on my door my second day there with a plate of homemade cookies and an invitation to join the Tuesday evening sewing circle. "We're working on a quilt for the children's hospital," she explained. "But mostly we just sit around and gossip about our families." The sewing circle became the highlight of my week. 6 women, all between 65 and 80, all with stories of children who took them for granted and families who expected endless sacrifice. But instead of wallowing in resentment, they'd found each other. "My son calls me every Sunday," said Margaret, a tiny woman with arthritis-gnarled hands that could still create perfect stitches. "Not because he wants to talk to me, but because his wife makes him. I can hear her in the background telling him what to ask me." "At least he calls," laughed Ruth. "My daughter sends me a text every few weeks. Usually just, 'Hi Mom, hope you're well.' Like I'm someone she met at a conference." I found myself telling them about Emilia, about the birthday party, about decades of feeling invisible. They nodded with understanding that came from experience. "The hardest part," Dorothy said, threading her needle with blue cotton, "is accepting that we raised them to believe we don't matter. Every time we put their needs first, every time we made excuses for their behavior, we taught them that our feelings were optional." It was brutal honesty, but it was liberating too. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself. I joined a book club at the library. I started taking long walks in the park across the street. I bought a small television for my bedroom and watched whatever I wanted without worrying about anyone else's preferences. I even went on a date. Harold, a widowed accountant from the 4th floor, asked me to dinner at the Italian restaurant around the corner. We talked about books and travel and the children we'd raised who rarely called. It wasn't romance exactly, but it was companionship, and it felt like a revelation. 3 months after I moved, Emilia started calling regularly. Not every day, but 2 or 3 times a week. At first, the conversations were stilted, careful. "How are you settling in, Mom? Are you making friends? Do you need anything?" I was polite but distant. I answered her questions, asked about the children, kept the conversations short. I could hear the frustration in her voice, the confusion. She was used to being able to show up in my life whenever it suited her and find me waiting, grateful for whatever attention she could spare. Now I had a life that didn't revolve around her schedule. 2 years after moving to my apartment, I was having coffee with Dorothy in the community room when the receptionist called my name. "Mrs. Patterson? There's a young woman here to see you. Says she's your daughter." I looked through the glass doors and saw Emilia standing in the lobby, holding a bouquet of flowers that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked nervous, uncertain, like someone who wasn't sure of her welcome. Good. Uncertainty was a new experience for her. "Should I tell her you're not available?" Dorothy asked quietly. She'd heard enough stories about Emilia to have strong opinions about my daughter. "No," I said, standing up. "I'll see what she wants." Emilia followed me to my apartment, her eyes taking in the space I'd created for myself. The sewing machine set up by the window, the bookshelf full of novels I'd finally had time to read, the small table where Dorothy and I played cards most evenings. "It's lovely, Mom. Really. Very cozy." Cozy, the polite word people used when they meant small. "Thank you. What brings you by?" I didn't offer her coffee or ask her to sit down. After 2 years of living on my own terms, I'd learned the value of not automatically accommodating other people's comfort. "I wanted to talk to you. About us. About how things have been." "How things have been is that you call me twice a week and visit once a month. It's more than I was getting before, so I suppose that's progress." She flinched. "Mom, I know I wasn't the daughter you deserved. I know I took you for granted." "Yes, you did. I want to do better. I want us to have a real relationship." "What does that look like to you, Emilia? A real relationship?" She sat down uninvited on my small sofa, the flowers still clutched in her hands. "I don't know. More time together, I guess. Sunday dinners. Holidays. The kids miss you. The kids see me once a month and talk to me on the phone every week. That's more than they saw me when I lived 10 minutes away." I know we didn't visit enough before. You didn't visit at all unless you needed something. I'm trying to apologize here. No, you're trying to negotiate. There's a difference. I sat down across from her, studying her face. She looked older, more tired. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. What's really going on, Emilia? Are you having marriage problems? Money troubles? Do you need something? Her composure cracked slightly. Why does it have to be about needing something? Can't I just want my mother back? Because for 30 years that's been our relationship. You need, I give. You take, I provide. You disappear, I wait. I'm not waiting anymore. She was quiet for a long moment, turning the flowers over in her hands. Marcus and I are seeing a counselor. There it was. The real reason for this visit. She asked me about my family relationships, about my support system, and I realized I don't really have one because I destroyed the most important relationship in my life. What did you tell her? I told her that I had a mother who loved me unconditionally, and I spent 30 years testing exactly how unconditional that love was. And when you moved out of that house, I realized I'd finally found the limit. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of anger I'd carried for years. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. She was finally seeing clearly. I can't go back to being the mother I was before, I said quietly. That woman spent 50 years putting everyone else's needs first, and she was miserable. I won't be her again. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to let me try to be a better daughter. What does that look like? I don't know yet, but maybe we could start with me actually listening when you talk. Maybe I could visit without needing something. Maybe I could ask about your life instead of just updating you on mine. It was a start. Not a solution, not a guarantee, but a start. The flowers are lovely, I said, accepting the bouquet. But next time just come. I don't need gifts. I need presents. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Can I take you to lunch? Somewhere you like. Not just somewhere convenient for me. There's a little cafe around the corner. Dorothy and I go there most Thursdays. They have excellent soup. We walked to the cafe together, and for the first time in years Emilia asked me questions about my life. About the sewing circle, about my book club, about Harold and whether I was happy. I told her about the quilt we were making for the children's hospital, about the novel I was reading, about the trip Dorothy and I were planning to Savannah in the spring. You're different, she said as we finished our soup. More yourself, I guess. I'm exactly who I always was. I just stopped hiding it under 50 years of other people's expectations. When we walked back to my building, Emilia hugged me goodbye. Not the quick, obligatory hug of someone fulfilling a duty, but a real embrace. Can I call you tomorrow? Not because I need anything, just to talk. I'd like that. After she left, I sat in my apartment arranging the flowers in a vase. Through my window I could see the park where children played on swings and couples walked hand in hand. Dorothy would be over soon for our evening card game. Harold had invited me to a concert next weekend. The sewing circle was meeting tomorrow night. At 72 I finally had a life that belonged to me. Emilia called the next day, just as she'd promised. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The weather, a book she was reading, Tommy's soccer game. When she hung up, she didn't ask for anything, didn't need anything, didn't expect anything except the conversation we just had. It was the best phone call we'd had in 30 years. I wasn't naive enough to think everything was fixed. Relationships built on decades of imbalance don't heal overnight. But for the first time since Emilia was born, I felt like I had a daughter instead of just someone who happened to share my DNA. More importantly, I had myself back. The woman I'd been before I learned to shrink, before I learned to wait, before I learned that my worth was measured by how much I could give away. At 72 I was finally free. And it was worth the wait.